We are running on CPT, but we had some tech issues. But we're here, we're great, we're fab, we're Black. Happy Black History Month. Happy Monday that feels like or Tuesday that feels like a Monday, even I'm confused. And finally, happy Mardi Gras, because I'm from New Orleans, so I got to point that out. But anyways, I am Taylor. I am a manager on the brand integration team in product placement here at Ben. And I have a pretty extensive background working in TV production and development on the film side as well. And so this year for Black History Month, I really wanted to put together a panel that discusses, in depth what it's like to be a person of color in Hollywood. Especially in this day and age, the streamers have streamers, the reboots have reboots. We've got an 80-year-old Harrison Ford playing Indiana Jones again. One of the top grossing and critically acclaimed movies of the year was Top Gun, and there was one brother in it, and he had about 4 lines. I mean, y'all, let's get into it. But before we do, I really wanted our panelists to introduce themselves, and just so everybody in the audience has, sort of good context as to where they are coming from in terms of their professional career and experiences. So yeah, my lovely panelist, Alicia, you're first on my screen, so you can go first.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Alicia Etnoff. I'm so happy to be here. I am a television writer out here in Los Angeles, and I've been on a couple seasons of The Game, speaking of reboots. And so I am a story editor. So yes, hi, nice to meet everyone.
Got it. Whoever would like to go next.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Thomas JT Royston. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Never Whisper Justice. We are a impact first creative agency, most known for our film Black Boys on NBC Peacock. We mostly specialize in long form feature documentary films, but also do some purpose-driven commercial campaign work as well.
Hello, everyone. I am Neil Phillips. I am the Chief Diversity Officer with Hollywood Foreign Press Association, and we are responsible for the Golden Globe Awards. So I'm very happy to be here, and I look forward to spending the time.
Amazing. Thank you for the intros. So, let's get into it. Starting off, I just want to ask all three of you, in your experience as a person of color in Hollywood, what trials and tribulations have affected your path most significantly and why? Anybody can go. Free for all discussion.
Well, I'll start. I've been with Hollywood Foreign Press Association in this capacity for almost a year and a half, yeah. And it's hard to be plugged into anything Hollywood or anything award show and not be familiar with the trials and tribulations that the Hollywood Foreign Press Association has experienced over that time. And, personally, this is my first foray into the entertainment media industry or Hollywood in general. So my background is much more on the way I refer to it is I do anything and everything I can to celebrate and promote equal human value. And in that role, I've done that as an educator. I'm now doing it as a DE&I professional. And, the trials and tribulations that I've encountered have really been of the organization trying to reinvent itself as an organization from an organization that transgressed, from an organization that really failed to identify and subsequently embrace and commit to a really progressive DE&I identity. And as a result, really, paid for that transgression by way of, in a number of forms in the industry. There were boycotts and basically people just said, HFPA, you got to go get some things fixed. And so we've spent the time trying to do that. And, we're proud that we were able to air the 80th Golden Globes on NBC this past January. And yes, and so we felt really good about the work that we've been doing. And the biggest thing is that we know that the work's not done. This was never about reaching any kind of finish line. This was about developing and embracing a new DE&I identity that is not a short-term effort at all. So that's how I would respond to that.
Absolutely. And we hope it is not short term. I feel like that happens a lot with these situations. They think, 1 year can sort of rectify however many years before of transgressions and things like that. And so thank you for all that you're doing and, for fighting the good fight, because there have been some major improvements, and I'm sure you are a testament of that.
You're great to say that. Thank you.
Alicia and JT, as producers, as writers, what have you guys been faced with? I'm sure like everything, even me as an assistant working in the industry, it was crazy, but would love to hear what you guys think.
Yeah, sure. I'll go. While I've been fortunate, I guess as we all have, to be, successful, whatever that means. And as you mentioned, as an assistant, it was actually quite hard. I think that oftentimes people want to put young people of color or people of color in general in boxes. And being a comedy writer who I guess had lots of thoughts and opinions that weren't particularly able to be put in a box, it kind of became difficult to make that move to writing from the assistant realm. People didn't quite know what box to put me in. And so, that created, I think, a lot of soul searching, I guess one could say, to be able to find my voice and say, like, no, it doesn't matter that I'm not as Black as you think that someone should be acting, or as whatever someone should be acting. I have a lot to offer, and thankfully, that transition finally happened. But that is like a big, kind of like a core of the trials and tribulations I've had, is like, is that kind of labeling, how to kind of, I guess, package yourself as a comedy writer in LA.
For sure. And can attest to the fact that, putting us in boxes is like a whole thing, but also you are a magnificent writer. And I think comedy writing is very tricky, and especially being a Black woman on top of that, it's got to be hard, but you have done so beautifully, and wishing you the best in your career just in general.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. JT, what has been going on in the producer space?
Yeah, so I mean, for me personally, I think I had maybe a more like insular or like kind of non-traditional, I would say, introduction to Hollywood. So when I actually started my career as a working advertising specifically, thought I wanted to do the Mad Men of the West Coast type thing and work in an agency. And ultimately, I got about 4 years in, and I was learning a lot, but I wasn't on the content side. I was really craving that. And I also wanted to involve myself in service more. And so that kind of set me out to go invest my time in both just more work around. Actually, I think I volunteered at this organization. It's a foster youth organization in Compton called Peace for Kids. I was like getting into music production, just trying to scratch that itch, figure out what that looked like. Yeah. And ultimately what happened is I got sent to Albuquerque, New Mexico by this firm that I was with to speak. I believe it was on like email marketing and online advertising, just pretty run-of-the-mill stuff. But while I was there was this woman who was talking about her most recent film that she was working on, and how she just produced one that was, it centered a modern day school segregation, and it was picked up by Ava DuVernay and syndicated through Netflix. Wow. And how she was working on her new film that focused on the experiences of young Black men in America at the intersection of sports, mass incarceration, and education. And I looked at her and I was like, you know what? You're doing way cooler stuff than I'm doing. Let's have a conversation. And that was Sonia Lohman, who was the director of our first film, Black Boys. And we got to put together a team of educators, activists, filmmakers, and really took on this 3.5 year process of just figuring out, what it means to really illuminate the experiences of young Black men in America in a way that we felt like was rich and nuanced and something we hadn't seen before. And I feel like that was my first environment where a little bit about me. I grew up as a military brat. So I was born in Texas, moved to Germany, Hawaii, Santa Barbara, all these great vacation spots. But not a lot of representation there. I mean, pretty white through and through. And so this was the first time where I actually felt a community of belonging that I really wanted to democratize through the work that I was doing. And so having that experience, and then the film coming out, it did do well. It got picked up on Peacock. I think that my then introduction, thank you. My then introduction to the industry was a little different in regards to, I felt like there was this language that I had been cultivating and this feeling that I had been exposed to that I appreciated so deeply, but it wasn't necessarily something that was resonant within the industry. And so that was something that I feel like I had to navigate and understand, and it was difficult. But I do think that in a lot of cases, I've been relatively privileged when it comes to just my entry point proper.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just speaking of diversity, we all know diversity behind the camera is just as important, if not more, than diversity in front of the camera. What are ways that we can ensure that production companies, that networks, that studios maintain and believe in this concept? Like, have we noticed an increase of people of color working in production in the last 5 to 10 years? Or is there an increase of content that focuses on characters of color? And I mean that specifically focusing on characters of color. We all know every show has the one token, or film has the one token Black friend or whatever. So I'm talking about content that is truly about diverse experiences. Has that increased at all? What do y'all think?
I mean, I think it has. Obviously we're in a very kind of precarious place in this industry where there's a lot of, the world is burning. But I do think that, coming from the writing perspective, a way to make sure that, as you mentioned earlier, that it's not a trend or that it's not temporary. As a writer, it's to continue to boldly write characters in there. For example, as a dark-skinned Black woman, it is my job as a writer to say in my scripts, it is an intentionally dark-skinned lead, or these characters are coming specifically from these places. I think that, because we are, the minority in this industry, it's easy to, I think, face forward with fear, or wanting to make sure it's a universal entry point for everyone. I do think, at least on the creative side, it's important to continue to write the nuanced characters that and specific characters that will make sure that there are people in those kinds of people in your projects. And I mean, there are people like Rama Muhammad, who did Unreasonable Doubt. She had an all-Black writers room. Like, those are kind of mandates that she set. And so I do think it's important to demand and not be afraid of kind of your power. I do think we all are very powerful in our places in the industry. And so, I mean, from the creative side, that's my answer there, is that, you must continue to be specific in your characters, even if you get the advice that, well, don't put the specificity in there because you want the executives to imagine what it could be. But it's okay to be specific, because I think the specificity will ensure that people are employed. Specific people are employed.
I just have a follow-up question for you, Alicia. Have you come up with that a lot with, I mean, it just, in my experience working at studios and networks, a lot of the people at the top are not diverse at all. It's majority white executives who are, making these bigger decisions, these yes or no decisions.
Absolutely.
And have you come across that, where it's sort of like they want something to look a little different or sound a little bit different, and you have to fight for it?
Oh, absolutely. Oh gosh, yeah. I spent all last year developing a television show with a studio and a network, and it was a constant conversation of, these characters are a specific culture, and not just a monolithic Black family or characters. These are specifically from this place that my family is from. And no, I totally get that we want this show to be 4 quadrants, but this character is from this place, and I promise everyone will run, not walk, to see this show, but these are the characters. But it was a constant conversation. And I have to admit, at first I was like, oh gosh, I don't want the show to go away. Of course I will, they can be vaguely all races. And then eventually I had to say, like, as a creative, like, it is your job to kind of protect the egg that you're, trying to bring forth. And so I got more specific, and people, I could think, people, obviously it depends, but people respected me for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And JT and Neil, like, what are your thoughts on this topic? And are there practices that we can be fighting for to enforce so that we do have diversity in front and behind the camera?
Yeah, JT, if you don't mind, I have just some thoughts on that.
Yeah, of course.
One of them is, this is not just a Hollywood or an entertainment industry issue, but I think it's really important to strip people of the lazy and often initial response to underrepresentation by having them say that they can't find people, that they can't find us. That, it would be great to have a more diverse film crew or more diverse set designers, but we just can't find them. And, the problem is with that lazy response is that it lets people off the hook with really minimal and in too many cases, no effort at all. So one of the ways to combat that is to enhance and augment the supply, right? So one of the things that Hollywood Foreign Press Association has been doing for years through their very generous philanthropy partnerships, we've got relationships, grants that HFPA has given out to colleges and universities throughout California, through different nonprofit agencies, grassroots organizations who do a lot of work. This is their reason for being, is cultivating, creatives of color in front of and behind the camera, to expose them to the industry, to help them develop the skills, to help them plug into existing networks, so that that excuse of, we can't find them is just totally removed from the table, because the more really capable creatives there are, and they become candidates for these positions, we're stripping people of a really weak excuse to not be able to provide that. So I think that grassroots effort is really, really big, just to keep cultivating. And when you have folks like JT and Alicia doing the work that they're doing, what a wonderful, right? Like, you hear the phrase role model so often and it gets watered down, but my gosh, I mean, they're doing this great work with this success, and people see that. And when they see that, they realize, oh my gosh, that could be me. And these are folks who have walked this path. So I think there's a whole lot to that. But when you think about the grassroots and cultivating and elevating talent, I just think that's absolutely critical.
For sure. And even things like, recruiting from HBCUs. I don't know. There's just, that excuse drives me crazy, because I'm like, we're here, we're creative, we're doing it. So to say that we are not is blasphemous. And as you say, it's just kind of like an easy way out. But yeah, JT, thoughts?
Yeah, I love, Neil, I love that kind of foundation pillar point around the importance of investment in the grassroots. And I feel like, a lot of the work that I spend doing is really like, how are we connecting the grassroots, like, to the grass tops as well? And kind of what conversations are being having at that higher level that are also where the needle needs to be moved a little bit. And I feel like, in a lot of ways, I think that it comes down to like precedents in media. I think that when it comes to the reason why oftentimes, both from an environmental perspective, but also just from a historical perspective, when you have these, predominantly white executives who are maybe not interested in greenlighting something, or they don't know why something's important, they don't have a perceived precedent for like how that indexes well. And I think that what it is that we're doing now is, in the stories that Alicia's telling, or the ways in which people are kind of making their way up the ladder and being able to, I would say, tell the stories that they're drawn to, or that are culturally affirming of their identity. We're setting those new precedents. But I feel like that's a primary issue. And I feel like there's also, in regards to solutions around that, there has been more pushes towards investment in Black media, right? Whether it's like from an equity perspective. And I think that is the kind of a stimulation necessary that's going to be able to allow for risks to be taken, frank, quote unquote, risks to be taken, right? But the beautiful thing is also creators aren't going to stop creating. Creators of color are creating without apology at amazing rates. Also, Nielsen just came out with a report about the buying power of the Black consumer being 300 billion and untapped, right? So it's also for those people who are actually interested in like building that connective tissue. They're going to have a first mover advantage of having the language for what it means to index in our community properly, and they're going to be winning out and thriving. And so I also think that like one thing that I love, and Byron Allen said this, is when he comes into these rooms and conversations around media, generally speaking, like don't lead with your like philanthropic efforts. You know what I mean? Like there's a mutuality here. You know what I mean? And I think that being able to really name that mutuality and say like, hey, like this is actually really good for you if you decide to see it. But if not, we'll keep it pushing because we're doing dope stuff over here. So
yeah, absolutely. And well said. Like I just want to get you three in front of all of Hollywood and be like, listen to these geniuses, because I just get frustrated hearing about it and having so many friends who are, in it, in the depths of it, producers, writers, directors, all of it, and people like Neil who are tackling it from a structural point. And I don't know. I think we are being heard, but I think it can be better, as I think are a lot of things in terms of race relations in the world. So, we're going to keep trucking. Anyway, on to the next. So I will say there is currently a huge, huge surplus of content that is, in my mind, beginning to backfire a little bit. There's countless streamers, there's digital, there's social content, there's premium cable, there's basic cable. We're starting to see productions, get scrapped mid-production, mid-shoot, due to budget cuts. Meanwhile, older content is being completely eradicated from their streaming homes due to mergers, conglomerate conflicts, cancellations. We've even seen some theatrical releases completely bomb because people would rather wait until it airs on a streaming platform, aka stay at home and save the money. I know, I've done it before. I am guilty of that. Basically, all that to say, there is a cultural shift happening in this industry. And what do we think this means for creatives of color? Is it benefiting us? Is it hurting us? What do we think?
JT, you look like you're ready to say something. Why don't you go?
Yeah, I think you saw the fixing of the lips. Yeah. You know what? I received the question of for creatives of color. I always receive, my first film was called Black Boys. Presently working on a film Taylor knows called Black Girls as a companion piece. And I receive the question oftentimes, why Black stories, right? And, I feel like even when we were considered 3/5 of a person, we still found ways to make ourselves whole, And so when people are consuming our stories, like, what does that mean for the ability to find capacity for finding love in the other, or even love for themselves, And so I do think that the level of nuance to our stories, the level of nuance to our history and the understanding of who we are is something that has so much power to it, especially in times that might be a little turbulent. We just lived through racial reckoning, pandemic, great resignation, now great consolidation, right? But like, frankly, like our people have gone through much worse, right? And I think that that's something that we've been able to be survived from, and our stories have lived in that way. So I actually think that there's a lot more when it comes to our unique value that we're providing that really opens up the ability for us to be able to tell these stories in a way that's needed and necessary, and also doesn't fall flat because we're speaking to a very deep place.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would only add to that I think, you can think back, you're not, none of you are as old as I am, but, there was a time, I guess I'll start by saying that anything that expands the number of entry points is a good thing for creatives of color.
Okay.
And there was a time when if you had content, if you couldn't get a meeting with NBC, ABC, or CBS, your project was dead before it ever had a chance of being alive. And then HBO came along, and MTV, and And now with these streaming platforms and with all of the different things that you referenced earlier in the conversation, there are so many different ways that content can get out to the world. And some of them more sophisticated than others, some of them with more reach, and some of them with more brand recognition and all that. We're aware of that, but still, their content is able to be consumed through so many different avenues in so many different ways. Now, I think that's absolutely a good thing for populations that have been underrepresented historically, because there are more and more gatekeepers, which means there are more and more gates. And I just think that's a good thing. Is it going to be an overnight transformation where we say, my gosh, this logjam that you referenced isn't going to exist? No, it's not going to work sort of that quickly or that directly, but I do think that that's a trend in the right direction. And then the other thing, when you couple that with the changing socioeconomic demographic that JT referenced earlier, I mean, there's buying power. And one of the big challenges of doing DE&I work is you always have to ask yourself, how do I make the business case to do the right thing for these corporations to do the right thing? How do I make the business case to really get them? The business case is there. As JT mentioned, the business case is there. And so I think if you pair those two things, that those are positive dynamics for creatives of color and for the typically underrepresented.
For sure.
I mean, I agree. I echo what JT and Neil say. I mean, you know, on the writing side, sure, you hear from representation, like agents, you know, like, oh, you know, streamers or networks are looking for big packages with like big celebrities. There's not going to be, you know, as many smaller or more, you know, specific stories that are going to be bought. But the reality is, what's exciting is that we do have there are, you know, celebrities who have production companies who are outreaching and reaching down to, you know, younger creatives or less experienced creatives to make their stories. And so I think Neil said it so beautifully, as, you know, the more gates the more gatekeepers there are, the more gates, and the more gates there are more opportunities to create content. So, you know, sure, I will admit it is a little scary that there are things being taken from platforms, that, you know, there's less things being made, there are things that are being consolidated, but the reality is we're here to stay. And so we will continue to make, we will continue to pitch, and we will continue to sell and hopefully get green lights. And you know, even if there is some reduction, I don't think that we will continue to, I think, make strides. There's just too many of us that are, I think, you know, not us as in me, but there are too many of us as our community who are rich and powerful, and so they will continue to, you know, get things made. And I believe that. I really do.
Yeah, and if I could add, in addition, I love the too many of us, and JT, you talked about earlier, they're not going to go away. We're not going to go away. The other thing that just doesn't get talked about enough is that we're really good.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so you can talk about underrepresentation, you can talk about inclusivity, you can talk about this. We just do really good things. Like, we're just really creative, really brilliant, really dynamic. The content that we create is, so to me, you know, I'm an eternal optimist, but I really believe that that good wins, right? Like, that high caliber, high quality, really compelling content that people want to consume. I mean, we've got decades and decades of history showing our ability and our worth and our capacity to generate just really beautiful and compelling and meaningful art. And that is only going to go one direction. We're just going to keep being good.
Absolutely. Yes, we will keep making strides, as Alicia said, as we always have, right? You know, I feel like that's part of being a part of this community, is powering through those trials and tribulations and doing it with beauty and grace. And I have no doubt that we will continue to do that. I have one last question, and then we'll sort of open it up to the floor. What is something that you're looking forward to in the future in terms of either your career in the industry or the industry as a whole?
I can tell you what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah.
Alicia touched on this earlier. I am looking forward to the day when the diversity amongst our group gets celebrated.
Yes.
That the joy and pride that we all feel as identifying as Black people is a wonderful and nourishing and soul-filling thing. And we're all different. And when we can get to a place when we can embrace both our solidarity as identifying as Black people and the diversity amongst ourselves and not feel fearful of that, not feel like the fact that I see the world differently than another Black man or another, and have that not cause us to feel like, my gosh, if the rest of the world sees us pronouncing our differences for ourselves, then it's going to kind of take away from our, I just, when we can start to celebrate our diversity with more boldness and more encouragement, that's where I'd like to see things go, and I'd like to play whatever role I can play in helping us get there.
Right. I think Issa Rae said pretty early on in her career in an interview, she was like, I am not the voice of all Black people. Like, I can't speak for everybody who is in Hollywood and who is Black. Like, that's not her job. And it's not like Ava DuVernay's job. It's not Oprah's job. It's not Lena Waithe's job. The experiences vary so much. And yes, I think we need to be highlighting that more and looking forward to taking that in a little bit more. Alicia and JT, do you guys have thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Neil, no, go ahead. No, please, JT, go ahead.
No, you first, Alicia, you got it.
Okay, well, thank you. I will say, Neil, I mean, yes, everything you just said, I agree. That is why I am so excited to be in this industry, is to broaden the way that we see Black people. You know, like I feel like I've seen myself in different ways in different characters, but not specifically my partner, and not specifically I'm so excited that one day there will be stories that will represent all of us, you know, like and not just in culture, but also I think in levels of oppression, if I'm being honest with you. Like, I'm so excited to see projects where, like, we're not constantly having to confront racism or colorism or sexism, you know, and exactly. And obviously we must never forget what the reality is. We must always be grounded in, you know, what our audiences are going through. But I am really excited to see Black mermaids that don't have to wrestle with oppression. You know what I mean? Like, I'm excited for us to see us in Afrofutures. I'm excited to see us in fantasy. I'm excited to see, you know, first gens. I'm excited to see Black people travel. I am so looking forward to, I think, the industry really taking the report that JT said seriously, which is that we have so much spending power. And so we can afford to see ourselves in France. It doesn't just have to be Emily. We can afford to see ourselves, you know, deep down under. It doesn't just have to be, you know, Marvel. Like, truly, I do believe that when we start really acknowledging that we are people that want to see very diverse experiences, that we will get to, I don't know, broaden our own ideas of how far we can go. I am incredibly excited for the future, because I do think that we are on the path to that.
Right. Yeah. I just believe and echo everything you just said. I, for one, personally, there are some titles that I don't watch because I'm like, the trauma, it's like we've already been through so much. Our ancestors have been through so much. Our families have been through so much. And watching that depicted on screen, yes, I believe in the history. I believe in it as an educational tool to get wider audiences to understand. But like, I'm tired, y'all. Like, I would love to just see Black joy stories where I can identify and laugh and celebrate the beauty of it, of how far we've come. But yeah, I see that that is definitely a reoccurring theme, especially the trauma part of it. And when it comes to like award acclaim and things like that, it's like always the deep rooted history, trauma stories. And I'm just like, there are other movies that you can pick that are not as like traumatic for audiences. And yeah, I just wanted to highlight that, but I'll let JT speak and then we'll open it up to some questions.
Yeah, no, I love and agree. I resonate with all this energy, specifically, and even more so. I feel like being like a justice centered company and having a name like Never Whisper Justice. I feel like oftentimes the thought process around like social justice oriented films is that it's like it's not very accessible and it's like very difficult to dive into, or it's like very much just centers trauma, right? And I think even for me personally, I have things that have come out recently that they've been on my list for a long time, but it's like, oh, do I really want to watch another slave movie? You know what I mean? Do I really want to kind of put myself through that? Like, can I give myself permission to be happy? Like whatever it is. And so one of my favorite quotes actually comes from it's a Cornell West, and it's justice is what love looks like in public. And I feel like for us personally, and for like the organization that I'm working with, we've been wanting to utilize that almost like as a framework to like really expand the aperture of how we view ourselves, how we view the medium, and just to like just like the nth degree. Even looking at my previous film, like with Black Boys, we had all of the images, all the cover art was in black and white. For Black girls, we did away with that. We wanted like our pigmentation to be able to be breathable and be rich and be full. And we talked about what vintage lenses to use to make sure that it was going to be as rich as possible. And I feel like just being able to move in that direction and just hearing that being echoed, affirmed on this call, is something that I feel like we deserve, and I think that it's something that we're taking, and I'm really appreciative of everyone's efforts, towards that.
Beautiful.
Absolutely. All right. I think we have one question, and that is, it sort of is very much in line and theme with what we've been talking about. How do we continue to make room for Black and intersectional stories in Hollywood? Yes, we are Black, but our experiences are so different from even each other. So we kind of touched on that a little bit, but if anybody wants to speak to that specifically.
Into the questions, how do we make room for those stories?
Yeah, for the Black and intersectional stories in Hollywood.
It's a great question.
Yeah, it really is.
To dive in, I feel like I'm going to return to what Neil said, specifically around. I feel like the business case is a very. I hate to circle back to that necessarily, but I do feel like in a lot of these conversations, that is usually what is being centered, for better or for worse. And I think that being able to have a comprehensive understanding of the industry and the opportunities associated to the industry allows individuals who are looking to tell their stories in a more rich and full way to be able to also kind of speak to the material reality of what the impact's going to be, when it's made and when it comes out. And so I feel like being able to being not necessarily being afraid to bring that aspect of the conversation into the creative, I think is very important for us. And I also think it gives us more advantages than one might think. And ultimately, in working with, in working with streamers and distributors, I feel like one thing that we try to do a lot of is just create FOMO. Like that's kind of the big thing. Like, I don't know how many people think documentary films like make money. Like they don't make a lot of money, but like if you do it right, you can make some money, right? And I think that ultimately, a lot of times people who are, whether they're documentary filmmakers or whether they're, writers and doing pitches, generals, etc., they come in and they kind of feel beholden to the streamer, right? But like ultimately, the goal is if you're a creator, like what you need to do is be like, make it feel like this thing is going to be made with or without you. Love to have you. You know what I mean? If you're a value add, great, you know, but like, you know, what I would encourage, and I don't know why I'm going this direction, but is not to come into these rooms with a sense of subservience, because like you are the thing, right? And I feel like being able to have that understanding and also that vision of how the industry works holistically allows you to move in a way that provides the confidence necessary to both produce what it is that you want, but also not make compromises that are going to, you know, dilute your worth or your value.
Absolutely. I love that.
I love that. I agree, JT. And also to add to that, I think the way that you make an intersectional stories is to is to make room for skills building for people with those diverse stories coming up. And I guess what I mean by that is that, you know, coming up as a writer or as an actor, you know, it takes a long time to get to the point where you are selling shows. And by that time, you know, you might be a little out of touch from certain experiences, which means we have to continue to train the people coming up. You know, I don't want to be limiting in what I'm about to say, but me personally, for example, there are a lot of people that I know that, you know, we didn't have family in the industry or, you know, the money to get a degree in film or, you know, so there's a lot of skills building courses and training that, you know, some people, you know, including myself, didn't get as much as maybe our white counterparts. And so I think as much as organizations can put money, time, investment, advice, resources into skills building, then I think the people who have those intersectional stories can have the skills to make sure that their cream rises, as Neil had mentioned before, that if we're in a place where the cream will always rise, well, then we must make sure that we're equipped to be able to rise, if that makes sense. And so, you know, like, for example, you know, you can't really Google how to properly pitch a show to a network. It's this very mystical thing.
It will be different in every article that comes up. Like everybody's gonna, this is how you pitch. This is how even execs.
Inaccurate. Absolutely. They're not accurate. There's not the right information. If you were Googling how to pitch a show, don't do what they say. And so it's like, there's like one podcast from like a showrunner that I found one time to be able to do. It's ridiculous. And so I think to be able to demystify, I think some of the skills that one needs to tell those intersectional stories, I think is what is key. And so, and that is not to say look, every network has wonderful programs, DEI programs, writing programs. There are wonderful, but I think that there needs to be more, because when there's not enough of those programs, then it sometimes it feels like you have to speak 3 languages, lose both your parents, and have, you know, lived in another country to be able to make it into these programs. And so I think that if there are more, you know, skills, you know, if there is more resources available to be able to give people the skills to rise, and I think that's how you really make room for those stories. They have to be good, and everybody has a beautiful story, but not everybody knows how to tell it beautifully. And so I think it's important to that's what I believe.
For sure. And like getting the word out about those opportunities, right? Because I remember
absolutely
when I was coming up, like not even knowing that there were some DE&I programs that can, like, you know, take you on the writing track or the producer track or whatever. So it's almost like they're not even being like promoted, and it's just like another barrier, because it's like you have to be in Hollywood to know they exist, and to get in Hollywood you have to, as you were saying, you know, go to college, learn all of these things, do the unpaid internships before you can get paid, and not everybody can be privileged enough to do all of those things. And it's just,
if I could add, you know, just as like for context, like I was fortunate enough to go to a school like Carnegie Mellon, but to make it out here, I cold emailed the president of ABC, who forwarded my email to, and then they were like, apply to an internship, and then I got rejected from the internship, and then I had to cold email somebody else to be like, please, sir, I got space to not go back to school for a semester, and then I was able to come out here, and then I was able to meet people who was able to help me. I mean, how many people were able to do that? It's not accessible.
A lot of people. I can tell you, I sent a lot of cold emails and I got no responses. So. It's good for you.
No, I was out
here like Googling people's emails, Googling like Oprah's email, like, how do I help me? Okay, we've got one more question. Do you feel corporate America/brands have improved their support and commitment to diversity in Hollywood? How can brands improve their support of your productions?
I want to leave that to the brilliant creatives on the call.
Ooh, I'll take it. One, I do think that there has been a vocal, when we were talking about the business case, we were talking about the opportunity, there have been commitments made, whether they have been to racial equity whether it's racial equity or whether it's Black owned media or what have you. And I feel like there are many organizations who are really walking the walk. I've been very fortunate to partner with a number on a couple of our films that I feel like have been able to provide us, I would say, the support that allows us to actualize what it is that we're building, and I've really appreciated it. With that being said, I do feel like there is also, this thought process that I feel like when it comes to being able to drive that home for those who might be still a little bit in the infancy stages of understanding how it might work, and specifically understanding how they're kind of indexing specifically with communities of color. I think that we're at a place where if you don't have a multicultural marketing strategy, you don't have a strategy at all, right? I think that like DEI conversations are, they're the beginning, but if you're not creating a environment that is conducive for affirming multicultural identities, you're going to die out. It's just going to be what it is. And so I also feel like it's one of those things where we're in a place where everyone's choosing to compete differently, and the brands, it's their opportunity to do so. And I used to, what I noticed is, so we had a campaign that came out with Black Boys. It was an impact campaign with Procter & Gamble around their 10-year commitment to increasing graduation rates. And what happened was our film was already done, and they hopped on after the fact. And also what I saw was, it was great because they blew it up, and we did, we created a curriculum, and we did all these amazing things. I feel like when it comes to brands, the ones who are most effective and kind of get those like kind of big tentpole moments are the ones who are willing to know that they don't have all the language, and that they need the language that's going to sustain them. And so ultimately, what I saw in that moment was, we had created all this language that was relatively novel at the time for the experiences around like Black boys and men. And that's something that they appreciated and wanted to champion. So they took that and they disseminated it through their channels. But it's on the creator to provide that future language for the brand to follow. And I feel like that's also something that we can, as creators, it's something that I would hold dear, because that's your unique value is your perspective and the language you're creating. And I feel like when it comes to brand partners, they're looking to find a way to advocate for that if it resonates from a business perspective, but also because it's going to be what's going to allow them to survive, frankly, and index in the communities that they're looking for.
Absolutely. And I think it goes a lot deeper than, we saw a lot in the summer of 2020, these huge brands putting out these statements on social media. And we're like, is that it? Like, is that the extent of your sort of platform to speak to diverse communities and say that you're a diverse company, just putting a statement on Instagram? Like, that doesn't really cut it. At least for me, I'm like, you gotta, and also the hiring, the DE&I initiatives in terms of HR, like that's all great too. But for me, it's once again, it's like going back to the studio network execs, like at the top, like you gotta have some diversity, put some diversity on your board. Like these are things that can actually make a difference versus an Instagram post or being like, well, we hired like 4 Black people last year. Like, congratulations, good for you. But yeah, that's just something I think about a lot. I don't know, Alicia, if you have any thoughts or
not thoughts that really would add to. I think JT said it so perfectly, truly, genuinely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are at time. I want to thank my 3 lovely panelists. You guys did an amazing job, and thank you so much for your time and just putting this helping me put this together. I really, really, really appreciated it. And all three of you are doing such amazing things. And I can't wait to hear more. I also want to shout out the lovely Asia Adams, our DE&I manager at Ben. She really, really helped me put this together, and it wouldn't be here. It wouldn't have come to fruition without her. So thank you, Asia. Also, happy belated birthday, Asia. I'm just going to put some good things into the universe. You know, may Angela Bassett get her Oscar. May you get Renaissance tickets if you have been trying to do so. And, you know, may we all celebrate Black art, not only this month, but every month of the year. I know I do. So thank you guys so much. And everybody have a great Tuesday/Monday. Happy Mardi Gras.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It's been a joy.
Thank you all.